You're wasting money? That sentence followed him everywhere. It was said casually at first, like friendly advice. Sometimes it came with a laugh. Other times with a shake of the head as if people felt sorry for him. No matter who said it, the meaning was always the same. They believed he was doing life the wrong way, from the outside. His life looked unimpressive. He wore the same simple clothes year after year. His phone was old, the kind most people replaced without thinking twice. He didn't talk about vacations, new gadgets, or weekend plans. When others went out to eat, he often stayed back. When friends upgraded cars, he kept walking or taking public transport. Nothing about him looked exciting, and people noticed. They noticed when he said no, too often. They noticed when he avoided expensive habits. They noticed when he chose silence instead of explanation. Why don't you enjoy your money? Someone once asked him. Another person joked, you can't take savings to the grave. Someone else was more direct. You're being too careful. Life doesn't work like that. He smiled politely every time. He nodded. Sometimes he laughed along as if he agreed. But deep down, those words stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. At night, when everything was quiet, the doubts became louder. Was he being too extreme? Was he missing out on life? Was everyone else right? He wasn't poor. That part confused people the most. He had a steady income. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to live comfortably. Still, he chose a life that looked smaller than what he could afford. And because of that, people assumed something was wrong. They thought he was scared. They thought he lacked ambition. They thought he didn't understand how money worked. What they didn't see was the reason behind. Every choice, each small decision he made had a purpose. Each sacrifice was planned. But explaining it felt pointless. People only listened when results were loud and visible. Quiet discipline rarely impressed anyone. At gatherings, conversations often drifted toward spending. New purchases, new experiences, new upgrades. When it was his turn to speak, he had nothing flashy to share. So he listened instead. Some friends slowly stopped inviting him out. Not because they disliked him, but because they assumed he wouldn't come anyway. That hurt more than he expected. Once, during a casual conversation, someone laughed and said, you act like money is everything. That wasn't true. Money wasn't everything to him. But peace was. And he knew peace had a price most people ignored. Still, hearing those comments again and again wore him down. One evening, after another long day, he sat alone and replayed the words in his head. You're wasting your best years. You should live a little. You'll regret this. He stared at the ceiling and wondered if regret was already growing without him. Noticing there were moments when he almost changed his mind. Moments when buying something unnecessary felt tempting, just to feel normal. Just to stop the questions. Just to blend in, but something inside him refused. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't fear either. It was a quiet belief that his future mattered more than momentary approval. A belief that comfort today could steal freedom tomorrow. No one clapped for his restraint. No one praised his patience. In fact, most people misunderstood it, and maybe that was the hardest part. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to be better than anyone else. He was simply following a plan that made sense to him. Even if it didn't make sense to others, still, the judgment never stopped. Every comment felt like a small test. A test of confidence. A test of patience. A test of whether he would stay true to his path or bend under pressure. What no one knew was that while they were busy talking, he was quietly building something invisible for now. Something that didn't show on clothes, cars, or conversations. They saw a man wasting money. They had no idea. They were watching someone lay the foundation for a future that would one day speak louder than any argument. And when that day came, no explanations would be needed. The truth was, his journey didn't begin with confidence. It began with fear, not the kind of fear people talk about openly, but a quiet one. The kind that settles in your chest when you realize how fragile life can be. He had seen it happen to others. One unexpected problem, one bad decision, and everything fell apart. That thought stayed with him longer than any advice he was ever given. So he started small. No dramatic promises. No bold announcements. Just simple changes no one paid attention to. He began watching where his money went. Not in an obsessive way, but with honesty. Small daily expenses added up faster than he imagined. Things he once bought without thinking suddenly felt unnecessary. Not because he couldn't afford them, but because he questioned whether they were worth the trade. Each choice came with a quiet cost. He stopped ordering food and learned to cook simple meals at home. Some nights were boring. Some meals tasted terrible. But he reminded himself it was temporary. When others talked about trying new restaurants, he listened with a smile and kept his thoughts to himself. He chose practicality over comfort, walking instead of driving, fixing things instead of replacing them, waiting instead of buying. None of it felt heroic. In fact, it often felt invisible. There was no reward for discipline in the moment, only inconvenience. Social life became harder. He started saying maybe next time more often. Trips were planned without him. Celebrations happened that he only heard about later. People assumed he didn't care, but the truth was he did. He just cared about something else more. There were nights he sat alone, scrolling through messages and photos he wasn't part of. Those moments tested him. Loneliness has a way of making bad ideas sound reasonable. Just this once. He thought more than once, but just once had a habit of becoming a pattern. So he stayed disciplined. Even when it hurt, what made it harder was the constant commentary. People didn't mean harm, but their words still carried weight. You work too hard to live like this. Money should make life easier. You're acting like you're struggling. He wanted to explain that he wasn't struggling. He was preparing. But explanations often led to debates, and debates led nowhere. So he chose silence instead. At home, he tracked progress quietly. Numbers moved slowly, but they moved. Each small win gave him a sense of control he had never felt before. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a guessing game. Still, doubts crept in. On tough days, he questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it. He questioned whether balance mattered more than discipline. Watching others enjoy life freely made his path feel heavy. But then he reminded himself of something important. Everyone pays a price. Some people pay now, others pay later. He had simply chosen to pay early, while others spent to feel good in the moment. He invested in peace of mind. While others chased excitement, he chased stability. And even though no one applauded those choices, he knew they mattered. Slowly, something changed inside him. The urge to impress faded. The need for approval weakened. He began to find comfort in simplicity. Not because it was easy, but because it was honest. He stopped checking what others were doing. He focused on what he could control. His habits, his decisions, his future. What people didn't see was how much strength it took to keep going without encouragement. How much discipline it required to stay patient when progress felt invisible. How many times he chose long-term peace over short-term pleasure. To the world, it looked like he was missing out, but in reality, he was buying something far more valuable than approval. He was buying time, and time, he knew, would eventually tell the truth. For a while, things felt steady. Not exciting, but controlled. And then life reminded him why control is always temporary. It started with small problems. An unexpected expense here, a sudden responsibility there. Nothing dramatic on its own, but together they tested everything he had built. The numbers he had worked so carefully to grow began to move in the wrong direction. Watching that happen hurt more than he expected. He didn't panic, but he felt the pressure. The kind that sits quietly in your mind and refuses to leave. Each time he checked his balance, he felt a mix of frustration and fear. It was the first real test of his discipline. This was the moment people warned him about. This is why you should enjoy life now, a voice in his head whispered. Nothing is guaranteed. He tried to stay calm, but doubt slowly found its way in. What if he had been too strict? What if all those sacrifices were for nothing? What if everyone else was right? Around him, life went on as usual. Friends upgraded their lifestyles. New purchases, new experiences, new plans. They looked relaxed, confident, happy. Meanwhile, he felt stuck, questioning every decision he had made. Social media didn't help. Every scroll reminded him of what he wasn't doing. Trips he wasn't taking. Moments he wasn't sharing. Life he wasn't showing. Even though he knew those images didn't tell the full story, they still affected him. Comparison is quiet but powerful. There were days he felt behind. Not just financially, but emotionally. He wondered if discipline had cost him more than money. Maybe connection. Maybe joy. Maybe memories he could never get back. One evening, after another long day, he sat alone with his thoughts. No distractions. No noise. Just him and the reality he was facing. He opened his records and looked at everything. Not just the numbers, but the pattern. The consistency. The habits he had built over time. Even with setbacks, he was still standing stronger than before. That's when something shifted. He realized the struggle wasn't a sign of failure. It was proof he was playing the long game. Problems weren't exceptions, they were part of the process. The difference now was that he had prepared for them. Even if it didn't feel that way, most people around him avoided discomfort until it forced them to face it. He had chosen discomfort early. That didn't make the doubts disappear, but it gave them less power. Instead of reacting emotionally, he adjusted. He didn't abandon his plan. He refined it. He learned to be flexible without losing discipline. That balance took time and patience, and more self-control than he expected. The hardest part was doing all this quietly. There was no one cheering him on. No one saying, "You're doing the right thing." In fact, the criticism continued. Some people took his silence as weakness. Others assumed he was failing. And for a moment, he almost let them be right. But deep down, he knew something important. Quitting now would make every sacrifice meaningless. Giving up wouldn't erase the discomfort, it would only delay it. So he stayed. He stayed when it felt boring. He stayed when it felt unfair. He stayed when no one understood why. Slowly, his confidence stopped coming from outside opinions. It started coming from his ability to endure uncertainty. From knowing he could face pressure without falling apart. That was a kind of strength he had never had before. The struggle didn't break him. It reshaped him, and without realizing it, he was becoming someone who didn't need validation to keep moving forward. Something was changing, not in his bank balance yet, but in his mindset, and that change would make all the difference. Nothing dramatic happened at first. There was no sudden breakthrough. No exciting moment where everything turned around overnight. In fact, if someone had been watching closely, they might have thought nothing had changed at all. His life still looked simple. His routine still looked boring. And the comments still hadn't stopped, but beneath the surface, something was slowly taking shape. The setbacks from before had forced him to become sharper, more aware. He paid closer attention to patterns, not just numbers. He learned what truly mattered and what only felt urgent. Each small adjustment made his system stronger, even if it didn't show immediately. And then, quietly, progress returned. Not fast, not flashy, but steady. His balance began to grow again. Slowly at first, then more consistently. The fear that once followed him everywhere started to fade. In its place came something unfamiliar. Calm. For the first time, money didn't feel like a constant worry. It felt like a tool, something he controlled, instead of something that controlled him. What surprised him most was how his mindset changed. He stopped explaining himself when people questioned his choices. He no longer felt the need to defend them. He listened, smiled, and moved on. The urge to prove anything disappeared. He understood now that people judged based on what they could see, and what they could see was only a small part of the picture. His confidence grew quietly, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the kind that brings peace. The kind that lets you sleep at night without replaying conversations in your head. The kind that doesn't need approval to feel secure. While others chased upgrades, he stayed consistent. While others stressed over unexpected expenses, he handled them with less panic. He noticed the difference. Even if no one else did, there were moments when he reflected on how far he'd come. He remembered the doubt. The loneliness, the temptation to give up, those memories didn't hurt anymore. They reminded him why he stayed disciplined in the first place. Still, the outside world hadn't changed much. People continued to assume he was being too cautious. Some thought he lacked ambition. Others believed he was simply afraid to enjoy life. A few even said he had wasted years being overly careful. One comment, in particular, stayed with him. "You could have done so much more by now." It wasn't said with cruelty, but it landed heavy. For a moment, the old doubt tried to return. But this time, it didn't stay. He realized something important. Most people measure success by what's visible. New things. Big moments. Loud achievements. But he had learned to measure success by stability. By options. By freedom from constant stress. And that kind of success was invisible. Until it wasn't, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he could handle problems without panic. In knowing that one unexpected event wouldn't destroy everything he had built. That security meant more to him than any temporary thrill ever could. He also noticed a shift in how he carried himself. He spoke less, but with more confidence. He listened more, but reacted less. He felt grounded in a way he never had before. Then, one day, the same conversation came up again. Someone questioned his choices. Someone laughed and said he had wasted time being careful. The tone was familiar. The judgment predictable. But this time, something was different. He didn't feel defensive. He didn't feel embarrassed. He didn't feel the need to walk away. For the first time, he felt ready not to argue. Ready not to explain. Ready not to convince. Just ready, because soon, the truth he had been quietly building would speak on its own, and when it did, the room would go silent. It happened during a normal conversation. No stage. No spotlight. No dramatic setup. Just a familiar group, a familiar tone, and the same old opinions being shared without much thought. He had heard it all before, so at first, he didn't pay much attention. Then someone laughed and said it again. "You're still living like that? Honestly, you wasted so much money being careful." The words were light, almost joking. But the message was clear. Years of quiet discipline were being dismissed in a single sentence. The group chuckled. Not out of cruelty, but out of confidence. Confidence that they understood life better. Confidence that they were right. In the past, he would have smiled and let it pass. He would have changed the subject or stayed quiet. Silence had always been easier than explaining a path no one wanted to understand. But this time, he didn't feel the need to avoid it. He didn't feel angry either. He looked around and noticed something interesting. Everyone was speaking with certainty, yet none of them really knew what his situation looked like. They judged based on what they saw: simple clothes, modest habits. A quiet lifestyle, appearances had always done him a favor. He took a breath and spoke calmly. "I didn't waste anything." The room shifted slightly. Not enough for anyone to react strongly, but enough to feel the change. His voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't loud. It was steady. Someone raised an eyebrow. "Then what did you do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and took out his phone. No rush, no drama. Just a simple movement. A movement that didn't mean much to anyone yet. He unlocked the screen and opened an app he had checked hundreds of times before. His hands didn't shake. His heart didn't race. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about ending a misunderstanding. He turned the screen slightly so they could see. No words followed. The laughter faded first. Then the room went quiet. No one spoke, but everyone understood. The expressions changed slowly: surprise, confusion, disbelief. Someone leaned in closer, as if the numbers might change if they looked harder. No one asked questions. No one made jokes. The same people who had spoken so confidently just moments earlier now struggled to find words. He didn't smile. He didn't brag. He didn't explain how he did it or how long it took. He simply locked his phone and placed it back in his pocket. "That's why," he said quietly. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. It felt honest. Someone finally spoke, their tone different now. "I didn't realize." He nodded. "Most people don't." There was no satisfaction in proving them wrong. No rush of victory. What he felt instead was calm. The kind that comes from knowing you stayed true to yourself, even when it would have been easier not to. That moment didn't change how he lived. It didn't make him spend more or act differently. It just confirmed something he already knew. Discipline doesn't look impressive while you're building it. Patience doesn't get applause, and quiet decisions rarely get respect until results appear. As the conversation slowly moved on, people treated him differently, more carefully, with curiosity instead of judgment. But that didn't matter much to him anymore. He had already won in the only way that mattered. Not by showing a number. But proving to himself that staying patient had been worth it. After that day, nothing about his life suddenly changed. He didn't upgrade his lifestyle. He didn't start spending to prove a point. He didn't bring up the moment again. If anything, he became even quieter. People assumed that showing his balance meant he would finally relax, finally live a little. But they misunderstood him the same way they always had. That number wasn't a finish line. It was simply proof that his way of thinking worked. What mattered more was what he had gained along the way. He had gained control. He had gained patience. He had gained the ability to sleep at night without fear of tomorrow. Those things couldn't be seen on a screen. He noticed how differently he reacted to problems now. Unexpected expenses didn't cause panic anymore. Decisions felt lighter. The pressure that once followed him everywhere was gone. Money was no longer emotional. It was practical. And that freedom felt better than any purchase ever could. Some people began asking questions. Not mocking ones this time, but curious ones. How did you stay consistent? Was it hard? Did you ever feel like giving up? He answered honestly, but simply. He didn't turn it into a lecture. He didn't sell a formula. He knew everyone had their own path, and his wasn't meant for everyone. What he understood now was something important. Most people don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they can't stay patient long enough to see results. Discipline asks for sacrifice first and rewards later. That order scares people. It doesn't look exciting. It doesn't feel good in the moment. And it rarely gets respect while it's happening, but over time, it changes everything. He also realized that being misunderstood wasn't a weakness. It was part of the process. If everyone approved of your choices early on, the results probably wouldn't be special. The years he was told he was wasting money were the same years he was building stability. While others chased comfort, he built options. While others avoided discomfort, he trained himself to handle it. And that made all the difference. He didn't regret the missed dinners, the skipped trips, or the quiet weekends. Those sacrifices bought him something far more valuable than momentary happiness. They bought him freedom, freedom to choose, freedom to say no, freedom to handle life without fear. Looking back, he understood why people doubted him. From the outside, his life looked limited. But from the inside, it felt open, secure, grounded. The real lesson wasn't about money at all. It was about trusting yourself when no one else does. About staying consistent when results are invisible. About understanding that the loudest path isn't always the strongest one. They once said he was wasting money. What they didn't realize was that he was quietly building a future strong enough to speak for itself, and when it finally did, he didn't need to say a word.